a.m. in New York City, 10 a.m. in London. Good morning, I'm Bonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg Brief. Let's get you set up for the day. Tensions rising again. The U.S. Navy seizes an Iranian-flagged cargo ship as the Strait of Hormuz remains shut. Oil spikes back up, stock futures dip as the uncertainty around peace talks between Washington and Tehran grows. All this following a record high for U.S. stocks at the close on Friday. $10 trillion in market cap set to report earnings this week. So let's take a look then. We'll start with oil as usual these days. Above 95 once again for Brent. Now we are still below 89 for WTI. That might be a bright spot, but look, still up more than 5% apiece for those oils and obviously all of the refining products associated with those oils. It looked like we were in the clear a little bit on Friday and we saw that big dip down. Well, now it's not clear about the status of those talks that are supposed to be starting tomorrow. It's also back on in terms of, literally drones and strikes in the Strait of Hormuz with the U.S. seizing that Iran-flagged cargo ship. You're not seeing too much of a reaction in treasuries. That two-year yield up about 2 basis points. We also, of course, have the Senate confirmation hearing for Kevin Warsh this week. If we take a look at futures, we are lower, but we're coming off 12 days of gains for the Nasdaq 100, down about 0.5% in terms of futures here, and the dollar index up, but again, we are off our highs of the morning. So we'll see what rhetoric comes out in the next few hours and whether Iran actually has a response as to whether it's going to participate in those peace talks once again this week. Do keep an eye on the VIX, though. We're up substantially this morning. Let's get a look at some individual movers now. Over to London and Chloe Melly. Chloe.
Good morning, Bonnie. Tensions have flared up once again in the Middle East over the weekend with this renewed disruption in the Strait of Hormuz. And that has, of course, led oil prices to jump. And we are therefore seeing all of those oil majors this morning move higher in a pre-market trading. The focus is now going to be on whether those two sides can come to the negotiating table as the ceasefire is expected to be ceasing very soon. Moving over to airlines and cruise lines, of course, this travel sector is struggling a little bit more, weaker this morning, given those higher fuel costs, the prospect of fuel shortages as well. That is particularly concerning, given that we're now entering the very busy and usually very lucrative summer travel season. And finally, let's go over to Top Build, because QXO is buying the insulation company Top Build for $17 billion. This is a major acquisition in this building product space, and therefore we are seeing Top Build rise almost 20% this morning in pre-market trading.
A nice gain this Monday morning. Chloe, thank you so much. That's Chloe Melly. She'll be back later in the hour. And coming up also this hour, more on this equity market and what we should be anticipating with RBC's Amy Wu Silverman. But first, tensions ratcheting up after the U.S. Navy attacked and boarded an Iranian-flagged cargo ship in the Gulf of Oman. This coming as Washington and Tehran were set to meet for peace talks this week. The Iranian foreign minister saying earlier this morning, quote, "We have no plans for the next round of negotiations and no decision has been made in this regard." Let's get to our team coverage now with Jumana Bersetchi in Dubai, Laura Davison in Hong Kong, and Ziad Daoud of Bloomberg Economics also in Dubai. Jumana, let me start with you. Just bring us up to speed on the events over the weekend that seem to have changed sentiment, at least in the markets.
Yeah, well, it's been quite a dramatic weekend. From Friday, things looking up. There was a lot of optimism in the air that maybe we're getting closer to a resolution, a full reopening, unconditional reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump was thanking everybody and really signaled that perhaps we were getting closer to the end of the war. But of course, by Saturday morning, things had changed. The U.S. once again reiterating that their naval blockade was going to stay in place, and IRGC responding that that was an unacceptable outcome for them, and therefore they in turn would continue to exercise their control over who gets to pass through the strait. There were reports of vessels turning around on Saturday morning, even gunshots fired at a couple of Indian ships trying to get through the straits as well. And then this morning, the main event obviously being that CENTCOM announced that they in turn had seized an Iranian-linked vessel. So dramatic escalation over the course of the weekend. It's fair to say no transit activities occurring now through the Strait of Hormuz. And at the same time, it leaves a lot of questions about the future and the fate of these Islamabad talks. The U.S. have said that they're sending a delegation. They're set to leave the U.S. this evening, led by J.D. Vance once again with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. The Iranian side, we've heard from the foreign ministry spokesperson about an hour ago, and he was saying that no firm decision has been made. And from their perspective, the U.S., as long as the U.S. naval blockade is in place, then they will keep their blockade in place and they will continue to exercise control over who passes through the straits. And clearly, Vonnie, that is a deal breaker too, because if you remember, one of the terms of the ceasefire agreement that was put in place 2 weeks ago was the reopening of the straits, and that has not happened. And then you have a whole slew of other issues where still the U.S. and Iran are very far apart. One final thing to bear in mind, the ceasefire does expire Tuesday evening U.S. time, Wednesday morning over here in the region. So the clock is ticking.
Yeah, Laura, let me ask you about that. What have U.S. officials been saying exactly? Because it seems like peace talks are about to happen, but you can't have peace talks unless parties are involved in them, right? It can't just be the U.S. traveling to Pakistan to hold peace talks with nobody. So what have we been hearing?
Yeah, we've been hearing a lot of mixed messages from the White House. The White House said that J.D. Vance, along with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, are going to be heading to the region U.S. time Monday night. So we'll see what happens with that over the next 12 or 15 hours or so if they actually head over to Pakistan for talks, whatever that might be, whoever that might be with. But Trump has really continued to have this sort of, dovish but also hawkish, sort of mixed messaging. He says, on one hand, that he sees a deal with Iran as being close at hand, something that can come together quickly. But also we've seen him over the weekend return to these threats that if Iran does not make a deal, he will target power plants and bridges and all sorts of civilian infrastructure within the country. We've seen him, several times now come to the brink there and then pull back from those threats just ahead of a deadline. So that is the thing to watch as we head into the ceasefire expiring Tuesday night, Wednesday morning. Does Trump keep that hard line or does he maintain those threats this time and actually unleash more military power? We heard from Pete Hegseth last week that the U.S. Military forces continue to amass in the region. Hegseth even used words like locked and loaded. So there is still an appetite from the U.S. side about using more military force. We'll see what sort of state of mind Trump is in as we head into the next 36, 48 hours.
So that's the diplomatic side of things, the game theory that's going on there. Ziad, let me come to you because we're seeing real economic consequences, and particularly for Gulf countries. What's the latest from the United Arab Emirates in terms of what it might need in the future?
Well, I think if you think about the regional economic impact, I think there are 8 countries that ring the Strait of Hormuz. 2 of them, as of March, where we're exporting oil uninterrupted, Iran and Oman, and obviously that could change with the US blockade. 2 of them, the UAE and Saudi Arabia, were exporting only a fraction of the volume before compared to the pre-war level, but with higher oil prices, they're probably breaking even in terms of the revenue. 2 countries, Kuwait and Qatar, their exports have gone to near zero, but they're quite rich, so they're unlikely to get into a crisis after 1 or 2 or even many months of interruptions. 2 countries had their exports interrupted significantly and they need the money desperately, and if they don't, they might get into crisis, and these are Bahrain and Iraq. So that's the state of the economies in the region around the Strait of Hormuz.
Now, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that the UAE has actually approached the US to discuss a potential currency swap line. What does that mean exactly, Ziad?
My interpretation of this is that this is probably a call for confidence rather than a call for help. Let's remember that the UAE is an incredibly wealthy country, both regionally and globally. It has multiple sovereign wealth funds that are loaded with foreign assets. It has central bank reserves that are near $300 billion. So it's a rich country to begin with. We talk about the war, and yes, it has affected the UAE militarily and economically, but exports have continued. And the volumes have gone down, but prices have gone up, so that offsets a lot of their losses. And third, let's remember that 2 weeks ago, the UAE stepped in to help another country in the region, that is Bahrain. It signed its own currency swap with Bahrain. Now, if a country is in trouble and running short on dollars, I don't think it would have stepped in to help another country only 2 weeks ago. So my interpretation of this is a call for confidence. The UAE wants to join the list of elite central banks around the world that have a currency swap agreement with the Federal Reserve rather than a call for help because it's running out of dollars.
Important context there, Ziad. Thank you so much. That is Ziad Daoud, and thanks to our team for the coverage, Jumana Bersechi in Dubai and Laura Davison in Hong Kong. Now to other top stories trending on the terminal this morning. UniCredit CEO Andrea Orcel criticizing Commerzbank's strategy as he steps up his bid to acquire the German bank. In a recent presentation, UniCredit said Commerzbank has, quote, structural weaknesses that are masked by financial tailwinds. Ortel's presentation comes just weeks before UniCredit's takeover offer is submitted to Commerzbank shareholders. Revolut CEO Nick Storonsky told Bloomberg's David Rubenstein that he plans to take the company public. He spoke in an upcoming episode of the David Rubenstein Show, Peer-to-Peer Conversations.
So the way I think about it, we kind of will be ready probably in 2 years' time. But then again, depends on how good the market is. So we're a bank, and then for the bank, it's super important to have trust. And then public companies are trusted more compared to private companies.
And you can catch the rest of that interview this Wednesday, that is April 22nd. Germany's sovereign wealth fund is dropping restrictions on investing in weapons manufacturers. The fund will be free to buy stocks and bonds issued by defense firms due to increased tensions in geopolitics and a boost in German defense spending. Allocations to companies that make controversial weapons will remain off limits. Coming up, we'll take a closer look at oil as prices spike once again on renewed geopolitical conflict. This is Bloomberg.
I don't know, that could happen later this year. That might not happen until next year. But prices have likely peaked and they'll start going down. Certainly with a resolution of this conflict, you'll see prices go down. Prices across the board on energy prices will go down.
That was U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright speaking to CNN before renewed war tensions. Oil prices now gaining as President Trump announced the seizure of an Iranian-flagged ship in the Gulf of Oman. Retail gas prices hovering just above $4 now. Bloomberg's Will Kennedy joins us. Will, this idea that we've seen the peak, how can the Energy Secretary be so sure if we don't start getting, oil through the Strait of Hormuz, there's no declining in these pump prices anytime soon, is there?
That may be true, Vonnie, although in the US prices of crude oil have not risen as fast as they have in other parts of the world. It's interesting, the price action this morning, actually. Clearly we saw prices plunge on Friday when there was optimism about the Straits opening, and we had both Iran and President Trump saying the Straits were open. We have rallied this morning on the chaotic events in Hormuz over the weekend, but not that much, I think just over 5%. And I think that tells you, on balance, traders are still thinking that this is headed towards some kind of resolution sooner or later that allows cargoes to start leaving the Persian Gulf and for markets to begin to return to some kind of normality.
Yeah, how, though, does it end, Will? I mean, Iran did say that the strait was open, but it sort of had a caveat in there that it was open to sort of Iran-friendly ships, right? It wasn't just for everybody. And also the fact that the US is blockading, quote unquote, now means that it's a sort of a standoff. So how do you see this resolving such that prices do actually go down at some point?
Well, that's a political question, Vonnie. As you say, what appears to have happened on Friday is that the Iranians said the strait is open, and then Trump said, but our blockade remains in place. And perhaps reasonably, the Iranians said, OK, well, you can't have it half open. So they decided to stop ships again. But we do expect perhaps more political talks. There's talks of meetings at a high level in Islamabad tomorrow, though it's not clear whether Iran will participate in that. But ultimately, this is a political question and relies on some kind of at least medium-term resolution between the US and Iran about the range of issues confronting the two countries. And when that happens, then the strait will open and things will start to go back to normal. I think that traders' expectations are based on the fact that clearly Trump for some time has been looking for a resolution to this conflict and is very keen to get things back to normal. He's got an eye on the gasoline price, which you mentioned earlier, and I think that informs base case scenarios for people trying to understand and trade this oil market.
Yeah, absolutely. Will, we saw something like 17 ships that we know of, at least, transit the strait over the weekend when it seemed like things were a little bit more all clear. How long and how many ships would we have to start seeing on a daily basis get through the strait before we can start to clear some of this backlog?
Well, it depends on which ships. Clearly, the ones that matter to the markets are the ones that are laden with crude oil and oil products, and we need to see those move meaningfully. One VLCC, very large crude carrier, can carry 2 million barrels of oil. So, 5 of those a day, that's 10 million barrels a day. That's, equivalent to everything that's been knocked out. So it doesn't actually require a huge number of ships as long as it's the right ships. But to give you some context, in normal times, more than 100 ships of different types carrying oil, gas, fertilizer, containers, whatever it may be, are passing through the strait. So even when we've seen those trickles that you mentioned go through, we're still a very long way off normal service being resumed. But just get that oil through, and that will make a big, big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we'll see if those talks start to take place again this week. Will Kennedy, thank you so much. Coming up, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer facing a showdown over the appointment of Peter Mandelson. That and a look at what else is making headlines in your front page news. That's next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Vonnie Quinn in New York. Time now for your front page news. First up, the New York Times reporting Hamas officials say the group is ready to hand over some weapons, including automatic rifles, that belong to its police force. The Times says the step would be a remarkable concession, but one that falls well short of Israeli-US demands, which include full disarmament and demilitarization of Gaza. Next up, the Wall Street Journal is reporting ExxonMobil, Chevron and other energy companies are speeding up their searches for new oil and gas prospects far away from the Middle East. Exxon has outlined a potential plan to pump up to $24 billion worth into Nigeria's deepwater oil fields. BP bought stakes in oil blocks off Namibia's coast, and Total has exploration deals with Turkey. And finally, on the Financial Times' front page, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is once again battling for his Downing Street future. Starmer is scheduled to speak before the House of Commons in a few hours. Bloomberg opinion columnist Rosa Prince joins us now from London with more on this particular story. So, Rosa, he has survived plenty of attempts to oust him. Will Keir Starmer be forced out this time?
You know, it's a little bit of a Groundhog Day here in London because, as you say, Keir Starmer keeps coming under threat. His own party is quite unhappy with him, mainly because he is so unpopular. The opinion polls show that he really isn't chiming with the public. But the issue, again, comes back to the same old problem, which is that there's no clear replacement for Starmer. There's no one figure in the Labour Party who his own MPs, who are the people who would anoint that successor, can agree on. So, yes, he's under more and more pressure. No, I don't think he's going to be going anywhere soon.
So what happens over the next couple of days in the Parliament, and what proceedings should we be watching out for, Rosa?
So this is yet again the long tail of the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. If you remember, Keir Starmer was very heavily criticised for appointing Peter Mandelson, Epstein's friend, to be UK ambassador to the US. He did this even though it was pretty well known about their friendship, and Mandelson had some other questionable aspects of his background. He'd been had to resign from the cabinet twice before. He had some business dealings with Russia and China that sort of raised some red flags. The latest kind of iteration of the scandal is it emerged last week that Mandelson had actually failed his vetting by the security services, who recommended that he not be sent to the US. Despite that, the Foreign Office cleared him to go ahead anyway. That's brought up a bit of a row between the politicians on one side and the civil service, the officials, on the other side. Keir Starmer is blaming the Foreign Office top official, Ollie Robbins, who he said should have told him about this. Ollie Robbins is saying, you know what, this was the process. I knew that you wanted Mandelson into the job, so I made that happen. Keir Starmer will be in the House of Commons this afternoon to explain his side of the story, and Ollie Robbins is due to go before a powerful committee of MPs, of legislators, tomorrow morning. So we've really got kind of 24 hours, 48 hours of high drama in Westminster to come.
Yeah, now, Rosa, markets probably looking through this for right now, at least. I mean, gilt yields definitely higher by 3 basis points across the board, but we're seeing that across Europe and frankly, the world, and that's more an Iran story. At what point would markets start to maybe be concerned, if that's the right word, that Keir Starmer would be on his way out?
You know, I think the markets do get a little jumpy when Keir Starmer's under threat, when it appears serious. As I've said, for all the same old reasons, Labour MPs don't seem ready to really kind of push the trigger on him. In the past, when it's looked like maybe they would be prepared to do that, then there have been some wobbles. I think there are concerns about who could follow him. Perhaps it would be someone a little more left-wing. Perhaps it would be someone not so dedicated to those fiscal rules of kind of keeping everything in square and not increasing borrowing. If someone like that looked like being a viable challenger to Keir Starmer, then I think you might see some upset. So far, that doesn't seem to be happening. Again, this might change in a couple of weeks. We have midterm elections here where the Labour Party looks to be in trouble. If that kind of motivates Labour MPs to finally get rid of Keir Starmer, there could be some volatility.
Rosa Prince of Bloomberg Opinion, thank you so much. Do stay tuned. We're going to be speaking with Amy Wu Silverman next. It's 5:30 a.m. in New York City, 10:30 a.m. in London. Good morning, I'm Bonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg Brief. Let's get you set up for the day. Tensions rising again. The U.S. Navy seizing an Iranian-flagged cargo ship as the Strait of Hormuz remains shut. Oil spikes back up. Stock futures dip as the uncertainty around peace talks between Washington and Tehran grows. All this following a record high close for U.S. stocks. $10 trillion in market cap set to report earnings this week. So let's take a look at those markets then, with Brent crude below $95 a barrel now, but still up 5%. WTI up almost 6%, but again, it is below $90 a barrel. So we're well off the elevation that we had been seeing, but nonetheless, we're directionally higher today. Yields are actually pretty calm. We're seeing that 2-year yield even lower than earlier now. It's still up just under 2 basis points, but we're trading at 372.68 in a week where we're also going to be seeing a confirmation hearing for Kevin Warsh, potentially to the Fed chair position. If we look at futures, they are lower, but we're off our lows of the morning, and we're not pointing to a massive decline at the open. We are pointing to just a little bit of the froth coming off 12 days of gains for the Nasdaq 100. Of course, software stocks were up 14% just last week alone. And then some money going into the US dollar at the expense of other currencies. Interestingly, though, if you look at Bitcoin, it has turned around. It's back up again today. So there's a little bit of a mixture, it feels like, in market sentiment. Volume has been pretty low every day this month as well. Let's get to some individual movers, though. For that, we go to London and Chloe Melly. Chloe.
Good morning, Bonnie. Oil majors are doing pretty well in the green this morning after, of course, there's renewed tensions between the US and Iran over the weekend, which have led oil prices to jump. So now the focus is really going to be on whether both sides can come to the negotiating table and agree to an extension of this ceasefire. And so oil prices jumping is quite good for those companies. But then for travel stocks, it is perhaps not so good. So we are seeing airlines and cruise lines move lower this morning on the back of that. Of course, they are facing higher fuel costs, but also the prospect of fuel shortages just as they come into a very busy and usually very lucrative summer travel season. And finally, psychedelic stocks are moving higher this morning after Trump signed an executive order to facilitate the access and the research around psychedelic drugs that are used to treat things like PTSD. And so we are seeing the sector rally on the back of this executive order this morning.
All right, Chloe, thank you so much. That is Chloe Melly in London. The VIX might be far off its highs, but long-term volatility remains elevated, with doubt persisting on peace talks and a looming ceasefire deadline. Joining us now is Amy Wu Silverman, Head of Derivative Strategy at RBC Capital Markets. So, Amy, we're spiking again today on the VIX, but we're still well below 20. I mean, what is the VIX telling us these days? Is it a helpful signal of anything?
I think it still is, but obviously, given that we have these kind of weird dynamics, Vonnie, so for instance, we can actually get VIX going up when stock market actually goes up, we call it spot up volatility up, because sometimes you also get the right tail chase. I think investors have to keep things like that in mind. Look, when you psychologically get below that 20 handle, my joke is hedge when you can, not when you have to. If you have persistent worries, which I think many investors do, a lot of hedges just went on sale this past week.
What kind of hedges, Amy, if anyone hasn't been keeping track?
So prior to, I would say, the ceasefire talks, there was a lot of demand for downside hedges. They could be VIX calls, VIX call spreads. They could be call spreads and energy, so essentially playing for higher energy prices, or they can be something more straightforward, like puts on the S&P. Obviously, given the market sensitivity, we saw a lot of tactical hedging, so meaning people would place these hedges, but the minute we actually got the downdraft, they would remove them because investors have very short-term memory. You know, thinking about April 2nd of last year when there was a lot of whiplash, we indeed got that whiplash again. I would give investors institutionally the win this time because they were more well positioned both for that downdraft as well as for the rip back up. Now we're getting a sale, of course, on the downside because volatility prices have come in. So if there are continued worries from institutional investors, it is a good time to place on those downside protection trades again.
Amy, you just mentioned something there that reminded me of a more recent experience. You said that investors were hedging for the right tail risk. Is FOMO back? I mean, are people very, very worried that they're going to miss out on another rip in this market?
Yeah, I think to some degree we've seen a lot of that play out. You know, someone asked me last year, last week, not last year, but wow, boy, does it feel like last year. You know, what happens if we do get that rip up, that up crash? And a lot of what we see is a chase to call options. So that's why sometimes you can actually get the volatility for the VIX rising at the same time the index price is rising because they're chasing that right tail, and the VIX is essentially agnostic to if the implied volatility is rising either from the calls or the puts. Now, one thing we're seeing, Bonnie, is that we haven't gotten to the part where there's skew inversion, and all I mean by that is that call option prices are actively on an absolute basis higher than put option prices. We haven't seen that the same way that we've seen in sort of the meme frenzy or some of the other crazes, but it's certainly something that we're watching for that could occur, particularly as we head to earnings season and things get a little bit more idiosyncratic.
Amy, is there a difference in who's protecting, you know, against the downside and who's protecting against any potential upside? Is it different clients, different parts of the market?
That's a really great question. And I think that's really important to think about right now, because last year, when you looked at who was doing what, it was much more the institutional investors, so your hedge funds, your asset managers, your pensions, being the one to do downside, while retail was the one who was buying the upside. What's been interesting is this round, this year, it has changed. So you actually saw more selling on the retail side and institutional investors placing that up crash. Again, I think short-term memory is very strong. People remembering what happened with the tariff whiplash. They don't want to be caught off sides. And then when you finally got the full momentum of the rally, last week, you did see other types of positioning, for instance, like CTAs or some investors who are more systematic also coming in when certain criteria are met in the market, both from the stock market side as well as from options.
It does happen to be the second busiest week of earnings season coming up, right? How much does that impact how people hedge, you know, and might this all change? Might positioning change completely in a week from now when we know a lot more?
It certainly could. That's what keeps options fun. I would say that, you know, things are about to get a lot more idiosyncratic. You're going to go see that dispersion again, you know, the paddling deck we keep talking about, Vonnie, from single stock volatility and index volatility probably start to spread. The other thing I would be watching for is there's been a big divergence in the volatility between Qs, the NASDAQ and tech heavy names versus the S&P. A lot of that has to do with, you know, the potential fast track IPO process of something like SpaceX, but also basically from a reversion of investors to Mag 7 trade. So that was to some degree left for the dead. Obviously, they're going to be much more in focus. AI is going to be in focus so long as Iran doesn't take all the air out of the room with headline risk.
Amy, when you look at the VIX curve, where is it most interesting right now? How far out are people looking in terms of at least the war and inflation concerns, elevated energy prices and so on?
Yeah, another great question. So, what I would say is prior to that kind of big rally that we saw this past week, term structure was fairly steep and obviously just on an absolute basis a lot higher. It kind of indicated to you that while the near term was probably okay, people were still more worried about the longer tenor. So maybe 3 months out, 6 months out, as we get into the next slew of earnings, what that would say for the bleed in inflation, and then obviously midterms after that. What I would say now is, we've gotten this big digestion period where term structure has flattened to some degree because everything's come in. And I think that'll start to rejigger itself as we get into earnings and you start to get these single stock hits that have a lot of implication when management teams actually talk about if they are seeing any impact to the consumer from the energy shock that we've just had.
All right, Amy, it's always a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for guiding us. Amy Wu-Silverman of RBC Capital Markets. Now to other top stories trending on the terminal this morning. UniCredit CEO Andrea Orcel criticizes Commerzbank's strategy as he steps up his bid to acquire the German bank. In a recent presentation, UniCredit said Commerzbank has structural weaknesses that are, quote, masked by financial tailwinds. Orcel's presentation comes just weeks before UniCredit's takeover offer is submitted to Commerzbank shareholders. QXO buying insulation company Top Build for about $17 billion. The deal would make QXO the second largest publicly traded building products distributor in North America. The transaction is expected to close in the third quarter of 2026. Former Bulgarian President Rumen Radev scored Bulgaria's most overwhelming election victory this century. Radev opposes sanctions on Russia and providing military aid for Ukraine.
Europe has fallen a victim to its own ambition to be a moral leader in a world without rules. So what Europe needs right now is, again, critical thinking, pragmatic actions, and good results, especially building a new security architecture.
All right, let's take a look at those markets then as we head into another Monday, another trading week. Oil up 5% for Brent and 5.6% for WTI, still below $90 a barrel, though we do have pump prices now at $4 a gallon plus. Gold down about 0.8%, still around the $4,800 mark. We are seeing Bitcoin rise today. Interestingly, it's kind of going in opposition to the trade that had been on previously. VIX up to 19.57, and we are seeing the dollar index rise as well, to the detriment of a currency like the yen, for example, which is trading at 158.95, the Canadian dollar at 136.92. Coming up, the ceasefire clock ticking as renewed tensions jeopardize the peace talks supposed to be set between the US and Iran. More on that next. This is Bloomberg.
I assume that the Iranians will interpret the vice president not coming as a downgrading of this next round of talks, which could be the last round of talks for any time soon. And so they may pull back on their delegation, which I think it's going to be hard to get a deal done, at least a deal in principle, for that reason.
Prospects for those talks looking a little murky. The Iranian Foreign Ministry saying earlier this morning, quote, "We have no plans for the next round of negotiations and no decision has been made in this regard." This all coming after US Navy attacked and seized an Iranian-flagged ship in the Gulf of Oman. Bloomberg's Kasia Klimashinska joins us now from Washington. Kasia, what do we know about what's actually being said behind the scenes? I mean, if peace talks are set, is it just the US and Pakistan that are arranging this? Does Iran have any comment on the matter?
That's a very good question. We have less than 48 hours before this ceasefire, a very fragile ceasefire between the US and Iran expires, and we don't even know whether there will be any talks. We think that the US is still going. President Trump said that he is sending Steve Witkoff to Pakistan, but it's unclear whether Iran will send anyone. And anyway, there really isn't any area of agreement. The main area of disagreement is the Strait of Hormuz, where the U.S. enforced its blockade yesterday. As you mentioned, the U.S. seized an Iranian cargo tanker that didn't help. The U.S. is now in control of that tanker, and Iran is saying, well, if we cannot go through the strait, then nobody will be able to. So that's the major area of disagreement, which is pushing oil prices up this morning. But there are also other areas, such as, for example, the nuclear enrichment. President Trump said that Iran won't have any, and Iran didn't confirm that that's the case.
Yeah, and then you do see these little sort of escalations potentially to de-escalate, but at the same time, all of these moves, such as the U.S. seizing that Iranian-flagged tanker, I mean, they're very provocative, Kasia. Is the U.S. prepared to actually start some kind of kinetic warfare again?
That's a good question. I think we all want the answer to this, and President Trump has been kind of zigzagging on this. So on one hand, over the weekend, he reiterated his biggest threats against Iran, saying that if the country doesn't come to the table, then its power plants and its bridges will be destroyed. So that's a major attack, a major escalation on Iran's infrastructure if nothing happens before tomorrow. But on the other hand, even Trump has been saying that the situation looks good, that he is hopeful that this conflict will end soon. So I think the next 48 hours will be critical, and President Trump has a lot of meetings today. None of them are open to press yet, but I'm pretty sure we'll hear perhaps through additional Truth Socials.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, talk to us a little bit about the Gulf states, because the Wall Street Journal is reporting today that the United Arab Emirates has asked the U.S. about a financial lifeline, essentially. Not that it's in trouble now, but it's just sort of querying what might happen if it were to need a lifeline, right?
That's a very interesting report, because it shows how the impact of this war is escalating beyond just, oil, gasoline and jet fuel prices. This is one of the major players there in the Middle East starting to talk to the U.S. about a potential help. As you mentioned, the Wall Street Journal reported those conversations. They are very preliminary, and they happened here in Washington, D.C. last week just because everyone was here, every major finance minister and the head of a central bank for the IMF World Bank talks last week. So that's perhaps why the Emiratis took this situation and asked, hey, if we have any issues, if we run out of dollars, for example, would you be able to issue a swap lane, a currency swap lane, for example? So those are just early talks, just an idea, but it shows you the additional areas of concern for the players involved in this war.
Yeah, now, speaking of Washington, D.C., Kasia, we have a big hearing this week. What should we anticipate tomorrow out of D.C.?
Tomorrow, there will be the first hearing for President Trump's Fed chair nominee, Kevin Warsh. He will be before a Senate banking panel, and this will be the first time that we'll hear from him about what he thinks the central bank should do, given this uncertainty around gasoline prices and the broader economic situation. Both Republicans and Democrats on the panel said that they also want to discuss the independence of the central bank, with Democrats, of course, expressing their opposition to this candidate altogether. And it's not only the Democrats, there's also one Republican who thinks the process should not go through. This candidate should not be confirmed as long as there is an investigation, a criminal investigation that the Trump administration has against the current Fed chair and the cost of renovation of the Fed buildings.
Yeah, we're setting up for a big Tuesday. Kasia, thank you so much. Kasia Klimashinska in Washington, D.C. Let's get back to the Strait of Hormuz traffic. Practically a standstill with the latest tensions boosting oil prices. Now, Bloomberg's Julian Lee joins us. Julian, a few tankers got through at the weekend, I guess. It was a bright spot. Some tankers made a break for it. Can you bring us up to date with who's actually getting through and what the situation is?
Yes, hi, Vonnie. Very little is getting through. The US Navy has effectively stopped all Iranian-linked traffic through Hormuz, and Iran has effectively stopped almost everything else. So there's really almost nothing moving. We saw one super tanker of crude that actually made it through over the weekend. That's heading east with about 2 million barrels of oil. But that's really the only big oil tanker that's made it through now for probably coming up to at least a week. So we are still left with what Saudi Arabia can pump across to the Red Sea and export from there, and what the Emirates is able to pump to Fujairah and export from there. And other than that, almost everything that we would normally expect to come out of the Middle East is still bottled up.
Julian, with Brent at around $95 a barrel, is this a market that's pricing in, no traffic through the Strait of Hormuz for some time, and this is what price would be if that were to be the case? Or is this a market that's pricing in some kind of a resolution or a trickling starting back up soon?
I think it's a market at the moment that is hoping that there's going to be discussions on ending this and on opening up Hormuz. I think if the market were really looking at Hormuz staying as it is now, so effectively shut to everybody for weeks to come, then I think it will face continuing upward pressure. I mean, we saw prices significantly above $100 a barrel in the last couple of weeks. And I think if the market starts to believe that nothing will change, then we may well see oil moving in that direction again.
Julian, this seizing of the Iranian-flagged cargo ship, it's obviously a serious move, but it wasn't an Iranian ship necessarily. So do the Iranians need to respond, or can they sort of let this pass?
I think that's a question for the Iranian regime and perhaps for the Republican Guard. I think that they will seek to do something, or they will claim that something is in retaliation for this. I doubt that they will let it pass with no response. I think that the problem that is faced at the moment is that the Iranians were expecting that if they opened up Hormuz, then the US would do the same. They feel that they haven't done so. And so that, I think, has given more leverage for those within Iran who don't want to see any kind of a peace deal, any kind of an agreement that would force them to give up their ambitions or their control of Hormuz. And I think that's part of the problem that we have at the moment, that there are perhaps competing views in Tehran, and those who don't want a solution may have the upper hand at the moment.
Julian, thank you so much. Julian Lee with all that context there for us. We appreciate it. Coming up, $10 trillion in market capitalization set to report earnings this week. We'll get you set up for your trading week next. This is Bloomberg. Now a look at what's ahead this week. The Iran ceasefire agreement expires overnight on Tuesday. Plus, President Trump's Fed chair nominee Kevin Warsh heads to Capitol Hill for his confirmation hearing, also Tuesday. And then we get earnings from Tesla and Boeing on Wednesday and Intel on Thursday. A massive week for earnings. Let's take a look at how we're shaping up into the U.S. market session. We have crude oil higher, both Brent and WTI, up 5% plus apiece. Trading, though, below $90 a barrel still for WTI. That doesn't mean that the pump price is lower. It's still around $4 a gallon. Gold down about 0.8%, but we do have futures a little bit lower. Bitcoin as well is also rising today, so it's a little bit of an unusual market. That is it, though, for Bloomberg Brief. Surveillance continues the conversation. This is Bloomberg.